Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a topic that's really fundamental to sexual health, but also, often full of questions. The science behind female orgasms.
Yeah.
We're using a great article from Medical News Today as our guide here. And I know this is something, well, you've probably wondered about or maybe talked about.
Absolutely. It really is central to understanding sexual experience. But yeah, there's often a lot of uncertainty, maybe even misinformation floating around.
Right.
So our goal with this deep dive, using this medically reviewed piece, is to really dig into what triggers female orgasms, the actual processes involved, the whole evolutionary purpose question.
Which is fascinating.
Totally. And also, importantly, to clear up some of those myths that just seem to stick around.
Exactly. And this isn't just like opinions. We're looking at scientific studies, expert views, trying to get a solid, evidence-based picture. Okay, so let's jump in. What actually triggers an orgasm? What kind of stimulation are we talking about?
So the article is pretty clear. Orgasm is basically a response to sexual stimulation. And that stimulation can come in different forms: vaginal contact, clitoral contact, even nipple stimulation.
Okay.
What's really key, though, is that while vaginal orgasms can happen, they're generally less common than orgasms from stimulating the clitoris.
Right, that seems like a really crucial point. It highlights how diverse sexual response is,
Mm-hmm.
What works for one person might not for another.
Exactly.
So, okay, stimulation starts.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening in the body then, physiologically speaking?
Well, as arousal builds up, the first big thing is increased blood flow down to the genitals.
Makes sense.
And that extra blood flow makes the area more sensitive. The article also mentions that as things intensify, you might see heart rate go up, blood pressure too, even breathing gets faster.
Okay.
And then as orgasm gets closer, some people might experience muscle twitches or even spasms.
So the body's definitely ramping up. And then the actual peak orgasm itself, what's happening right at that moment physiologically?
The article points to rhythmic muscle spasms, often in the vagina, as a kind of defining physical event.
Okay.
And it lays out those 4 stages of sexual response, which is a helpful model.
Yep.
Excitement, then plateau, then orgasm, that intense pleasure bit, and finally resolution, where arousal kind of fades back down.
That framework gives a really clear biological picture.
Uh,
But we know the feeling is so personal, right? How does the article talk about that subjective side?
yeah, it really stresses how varied it is. Orgasms feel different for different people, and folks use all sorts of words to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
But the common element seems to be this intense pleasure, mainly felt in the genitals, but often kind of radiating through the whole body.
Right.
And what's interesting is the mention of endorphins being released after orgasm.
The body's natural feel-good chemicals.
Exactly. Which explains those feelings of, happiness and relaxation people often report. The article also notes things like possible skin flushing, maybe vaginal contractions during and after, and it even touches on female ejaculation. There's a link if you want to dive deeper into that specific topic.
Interesting stuff. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. I've always wondered about the why. Like, what's the evolutionary point of female orgasm?
Yeah.
It seems less obvious than for males, reproductively speaking.
That's a great question, and the article tackles it directly. It says the purpose is, well, less clear-cut than male orgasm.
Uh-huh.
They talk about this 2016 study, really thought-provoking, suggesting it might be a sort of non-functional leftover.
A leftover, like from our evolutionary past.
Kind of, yeah. The idea is that maybe the hormones linked to orgasm used to be involved in triggering ovulation in females way back when.
Wow.
So the takeaway is it might not have a direct reproductive job anymore. Maybe it's just stuck around because there wasn't strong evolutionary pressure against it.
Huh. So like our appendix or something. Something that used to do something but maybe doesn't now.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. That's the core hypothesis.
Okay.
But the article does suggest potential current roles, even if not directly reproduction, like the pleasure itself encourages sex.
Right. Makes sense.
And that can help with partner bonding. And strong pair bonds definitely have evolutionary pluses for raising offspring and such.
Gotcha. So even if it's not directly for making babies now, it could still play these important social relational roles. Okay. Now, what about all those claims you see online orgasms for better skin, better hair, amazing health benefits? Does the science back that up?
The article is pretty direct here. It says, while you hear a lot about orgasms improving skin or health, there's actually very little rigorous scientific evidence for those specific claims.
So probably not the secret to eternal youth then.
Doesn't look like it, based on what we currently know scientifically, according to this source. But And this is important. They do highlight that pleasure itself can be beneficial.
Awesome.
Well, positive sexual experiences, including orgasm, can potentially boost mood, help with stress, maybe even impact the immune system positively and strengthen relationships. So the benefits are maybe more indirect, tied to the positive feelings and connection.
Okay, that's a really useful distinction. Now, myths. Let's bust some myths that seem to constantly circulate. What does the article highlight?
It tackles a few big ones head on. One is the idea that if someone struggles to orgasm, it must be psychological.
The it's all in your head thing.
Exactly. The article refutes that. It says while psychological factors can be involved, absolutely, there are also physical and medical reasons. They mention vulvodynia, for instance. That's chronic vulvar pain. So it's crucial to know it's not always just psychological.
That's really important to clarify. What's another common one they debunk?
Another big myth is that orgasms from penetrative sex are like the main way or even the healthiest way. The article strongly pushes back on that. It states many women primarily orgasm from clitoral stimulation. There's no single best or healthiest way. It's about what works for the individual.
Good to hear that emphasized.
Yeah.
What about the whole you need to be in love idea? Is that true?
Well, the article says for some people, feeling love might be important, but it's definitely not a universal rule. Orgasm is complex biology, psychology,
Right.
and actually studies link more frequent orgasms to things like more oral sex, sex lasting longer, feeling satisfied in the relationship, asking for what you want.
Communication, basically.
Yeah, communication is huge. Also, expressing love during sex, trying fantasies, new positions. So love might be a factor for some, but it's not the only key by any means.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, and this one feels important. Can a partner really tell if someone has had an orgasm?
The article is super clear on this. Nope, there's no foolproof way to know unless the person tells you directly.
Really? No obvious signs?
People react so differently. Some are vocal, some quiet, some might flush, others don't. You just can't assume. So yeah, open, non-judgmental talking is the only way to actually know.
Absolutely. Communication is key, always.
Yeah.
Okay, let's flip it around. What if someone finds it consistently difficult to orgasm? Is that common? Should they worry?
The article definitely normalizes this. It says experiencing difficulty is common and can happen for lots of reasons.
Like what?
Could be not getting the right kind of stimulation for them, maybe past trauma, maybe just lack of interest sometimes. A 2018 analysis they cite found several risk factors linked to sexual dysfunction.
Okay.
Things like relationship issues, stress, mental health stuff, poor physical health, pelvic pain, or other genitourinary problems. History of abortion or female genital mutilation, sexual abuse, even religiosity, possibly because of shame or stigma. It's a pretty wide range.
Wow, that is a significant list of potential factors. Are there things that can help, though? Things that increase the chances?
Yes, definitely. That same study found things people can influence linked to better sexual experiences, like regular exercise, getting daily affection from a partner, having a positive body image, good sex education, and that intimate communication we talked about.
Okay, so there are positive actions.
Yeah. And another study comparing different sexual orientations found specific behaviors during sex were linked to higher orgasm likelihood. Deep kissing, making sure there's genital stimulation during intercourse, and oral sex. So yes, there are things people can explore.
That's encouraging. But when does it make sense to actually seek professional help?
The article suggests that if trying things on your own isn't working, talking to a doctor, maybe one specializing in sexual dysfunction, is a good idea. They can check for underlying medical stuff.
Like what kind of medical issues?
Could be insufficient lubrication, maybe hormonal imbalances, pelvic pain conditions, muscle issues, or the impact of past trauma. And they also mention that individual or couples counseling can be really valuable, especially if trauma, relationship problems, or sexual shame are part of the picture.
That's really practical advice. Okay, so bringing this all together,
Yeah.
what are the main things we should take away from this deep dive based on the article?
I think, first off, it's realizing that serious scientific research into female orgasm is actually pretty recent, historically speaking.
Yeah, that's kind of wild.
It is. And it means there's still more to learn, and unfortunately, some myths might even linger among some medical folks. So finding reliable, evidence-based info is key.
Definitely.
The article really underscores how valuable a good doctor, someone knowledgeable and compassionate, can be in understanding orgasm and tackling barriers to satisfaction. But maybe the biggest takeaway is just there's no single right way to orgasm or feel about sex. It's about your own pleasure, what feels good for you.
That is such a powerful and, frankly, reassuring message to end on. And for anyone listening who wants to explore more, the article does point to related resources on the clitoris, what women want, orgasmic dysfunction, low sex drive, even female ejaculation. Lots more info out there.
Exactly. It's all part of that ongoing process of learning and understanding this really important part of health and well-being.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it kind of leaves me thinking, given how relatively recent the serious research is, what other parts of sexual health and pleasure might still be underexplored? And maybe how can we all encourage more open, informed conversations to break down stigma and help everyone understand their own bodies and experiences better? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.